grateful, very grateful to Stewart Clifton, who is an attorney and the lobbyist for the National Association of Social Workers, Tennessee. Did I get that right, Stewart? Among many other things, I'm sure, but he can tell you about that. We are just so happy to have you here. We apologize for the late notice, but glad you could join us before the legislative session begins this year. And Stewart's going to talk to us today about legislative skills training, how to be an advocate with the legislator, and some, I think, Stewart, about how to track bills that may be of interest to psychotherapists and of interest in terms of mental health in general in Tennessee. I'm going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions that come up during the presentation, if you would just put them in the chat, and we'll reserve some time at the end to answer questions. But if something needs clarifying during the presentation, I can be monitoring that and let Stewart know about it. Anything else that you would like to say, Stewart, before we get going? Oh, and thanks to Melissa for being our technical person. Melissa Vickroy from NPI is going to make sure that everybody gets admitted. And if you have your name in full on your little screen, she can send you a certificate for continuing education hour later. So be sure to have your full name on your screen so she knows who you are. Okay, Clifford, Stewart, I'm going to send it back to you.
Thank you. There'll be a test at the end of this, and special credit for people who get all three of my names. I have three last names: Johnson, Stewart, and Clifton. And my father actually named me after him, so he should have known better, but no one ever gets my names in the right order. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this group today. Some of you know me from past years. I have represented the National Association of Social Workers, Tennessee chapter, for 75 years now. No, sometimes it just seems like that as we kind of look at our legislature, and has it really been just that long? Seems like an eternity. But I have represented NASW for close to 20 years. I'm an independent lobbyist. I basically rent space from two of my clients, the Legal Aid Society, the Tennessee Alliance for Legal Services, which includes legal aid societies across the state, and also NASW. We share space. So others of you know me from other times. In past years, I have not only represented NASW and TALS, the Tennessee Alliance for Legal Services, but the Tennessee Association of Pastoral Therapists and their efforts to gain licensure, successful efforts, and have basically have a niche practice based on advocating for nonprofit groups, broadly defined. So I'm glad to be with you. I do hope you will take me up on my offer to follow this up with a question, an email question, if you'd like, if we don't get to something you'd like to know more about. And this will be a little hit or miss because I've spent the whole week until about 6 minutes ago getting ready for a couple of other major things, like an Alzheimer's Tennessee conference call I was on earlier this morning. So I think we've got enough together to make this worth your while.
Stuart, while you're doing that, I'm going to pull up the right PowerPoint. I'm realizing this is the wrong
version. Okay, great.
So.
I will mention while we're doing that, that this is not supposed to be about substance necessarily, but I will mention a few little things, a few little issues that many of you are probably interested in as citizens, if not professionals. My point is that engaging in legislative advocacy as a citizen or as an employee that affects your field or affects our state is really pretty important. It can't be overstated. There have been plenty of efforts in the past by mental health and behavioral health professionals and counselors and all sorts of advocates who have been successful in many ways, even in a somewhat hostile atmosphere. For instance, last year, with the great number of anti-trans legislative initiatives, we came fairly close, the legislature did, to passing prohibitions about counselors of various kinds being able to talk with clients about trans issues. We think it was a close call. Ultimately, that was taken out of the bill. It did many other things about trans practice in Tennessee, but not regarding counseling and related issues like that. So that's just one concrete example. Obviously, it's not something that an individual practitioner can do on their own to just sort of take on a major thing like that and pass it or kill it. But I hope you'll be happy to know that there's kind of a camaraderie of advocates who are on the Hill whenever the legislature is on the Hill. Many of us paid, many of us volunteer on these issues. I'm not sure how many of you are psychologists versus social workers and other groups, but the psychologists in particular have an excellent lobbyist. He is so good that he is the lobbyist, the registered lobbyist for the lobbyist. We, as lobbyists, decided we needed a lobbyist for our own interest, and we hired him, Mark Green. So when the smoke cleared after the first couple of weeks last year, we had in fact stopped the efforts that some were making to prohibit any counselors from even discussing anything about trans youth and such as that. Also, general things to keep aware of that might be coming up. In a positive sense, thanks to the efforts by the longtime commissioner of mental health, Marie Williams, the Tennessee Legislature appropriated last year $50 million in grants, grant funding to increase access to behavioral and mental health care in Tennessee. A lot of that will be going toward keeping people in the field, sign-on and retention bonuses for workers, particularly in rural areas and things like that, scholarship funding for participating further education, and all of that. So that's a very positive thing, and one of the few bright spots by my own perhaps biased way of looking at how well the legislature is doing. Some potential reasons to be concerned and interested in legislative advocacy. There's a lot going on in the juvenile justice area. Not sure how much of that directly impacts your work, but we have had a pretty stellar several years of moving forward on things like real helpful juvenile justice initiatives, focusing on ACEs, adverse, what does that stand for? Adverse childhood experiences, which was a key component of the initiatives of the last Republican governor, Bill Haslam. However, right now, when they talk about juvenile justice, they are talking about an initiative to increase sentencing, making it easier to try children as adults in criminal cases, basically solving this problem about major incarceration away from community services. We don't know how far that will go, but it has pretty strong support from some very powerful legislators, so we're going to be watching that. Also, in terms of gun violence, you all know the sad situation we're in there and the deaths that have occurred, and the special session that the governor called that ended up turning into a battle by advocates to keep them from doing much of anything, because we, meaning we as advocates, realized that the only thing that had any traction of going forward was using that special session to dramatically change our juvenile justice laws, and to actually make that that time period of the special session just initiate a lot of very bad legislation. So when you hear about they adjourned without doing anything, it's a good news, bad news thing. They did nothing on the key issue of gun violence that many states are actively dealing with in a much better way. They essentially ignored the pleas of the Covenant parents and everyone else, and simply refused to deal with it. The good news is they did no harm. because the Senate, to its credit, refused to go along with the House. A lot of these initiatives would have passed very quickly. We're wondering what the future holds next year. In addition to what you know from the past, there's a lot of strong feelings about the death of a Belmont student this year, and confusion and questions about the protocol and our laws for when we incarcerate and don't incarcerate people with intellectual and disabilities and mental health issues. And there's a strong push toward more punitive measures and involuntary commitments, and we will see about that. Another thing that is maybe not a mental health issue as such, and I promise we will be getting to the main purpose of this, which is more about process than substance, but there's an impending major initiative of the governor, the Education Freedom Scholarship Act, which you've read about. It has to do with charters, and it has to do with vouchers and the funding for them and the impact of that on public schools. And I realize that's not necessarily your professional interest, but it is kind of questionable what's going to happen to our existing public schools, which is where a lot of mental health services are in fact made possible. There's a specific thing that happened in the last week was the governor has been pushing for very strong accountability measures in public schools and a loss of funds if that doesn't happen. We have a process for that, but he was specifically asked about the charter schools that he is promoting, and he admitted that that he has not thought about, nor is he particularly interested in going for any sorts of the same accountability that he's planning to introduce for public schools. I'm not trying to get too political here, but we are looking at a possibility of the public school system becoming dramatically embattled, and there's just a lot of private interest involved in charters and vouchers, as you all know. Problem with that for some of you will be, how will we be able to pick up and provide services from a mental health standpoint to a lot of younger people? So those are just a few broad areas that some of us are looking at for this session and worried about what's likely to happen. So I thought the way we would start would be doing something everybody likes to do. And where do I advance this? I should mention that Rachel is my intern, one of several interns that are working with me this year, and is helping me do this because I'm just getting off a long conference call and I'm less with it than usual. So what we all kind of need to do is realize that legislators, in spite of what I've been saying about possible terrible things they're looking at, these are people who respond to things like everyone else. If you're, as an individual or as part of a organization, are trying to stop a bad bill or push a budget matter or pass a good bill, you cannot do that without getting to know legislators. They make decisions based on relationships as much as content. And so some attention has to be given in any sort of skills training to how do you do that? How do you get a legislator to care what you think, to know who you are, what your concerns are, why they should listen to you? So I have this top tips for in-person visits. The good news is that one of the things that happened, of course, with COVID is that everyone came to rely on online Zooms and whatnot, including legislators. So when I say in person, I mean in person or where you're actually interacting and can see faces. And unlike what some people think, you don't really get to legislators or anyone else if they don't know who you are, you or your organization. So, by the way, I see people are still in the waiting room, waiting to be admitted, I think. All right. So whether you have ever thought of this before, one thing to do is to find a way for you and the organization you work with or for to develop some kind of connection with the legislator. They care about issues a great deal, but they mostly care about people. People who they think could be their friends, people who have taken the time to say, you're our legislator. We thank you for serving, and here's what we're interested in. They're very much like real people. It's about relationships as much as content. So I'm going to devote a little bit of our time today to how would you go about doing that? That's it. This is what it is. These various things I've set out here. Whether you're coming down for a meeting or trying to set up a meeting online, which is often easier to do when they're not in session, by the way. So this is something for the future. These are the things you have to remember to do.
Stewart,
You're not, yes.
sorry to interrupt, but it's not advancing on our screen. We don't see the tips.
Oh, okay. Let's take a moment for me to see if Rachel can figure that out.
So, you all don't see the next slide?
Nope, it's
What is-
just the first slide, legislative skills training is what, and it's
Oh, okay.
Interesting. Why don't we try stopping the share and resharing it? Is that okay?
totally.
Okay, great. And now I'm going to share. This one. Is that better?
Yes, that's it. Thank you very much.
Of course, thanks for letting us know.
I'm so glad you mentioned it. So these are a bunch of things. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I know some of you maybe have done this before. You've gotten to know your legislator or some legislator who cared about your profession or your specific bill. So just quickly, you can't, I mean, lobbyists can on occasion, particularly if they're lobbyists for groups that give money through PACs, they can often drop in and see a legislator without an appointment. But that doesn't work quite so well for a constituent. First of all, they're very busy, particularly during the session. A great time to get to know them is when they're not in session, and they might meet you for a cup of coffee or let you set up a Zoom with them with a group from your place of employment or whatever. But mostly if you're trying to get through to somebody to talk about a bill and they're already in session, these are the things you'd have to do. You'd have to make an appointment beforehand, if at all possible. You're not likely to get in. You can sometimes talk with their staffer who can convey what you're trying to say. It's very important to have built a relationship of some sort, either for you individually or the organization you're working with, before you need the help. That's just kind of common sense. And we're all kind of like that. We're going to say yes to somebody if we've talked with them before and think they have some sense. And if we're glad that they think enough of us to talk. Well, legislators are much like people in many ways. So you need to basically build that relationship when you can. And much of this is for the future, obviously. They're already back in town, at least next week.
So we have one question about what to do if the legislator will not respond to emails, phone calls, or notes left in their office.
That's not, you have to realize that there's a lot of people trying to get to them, but there are some legislators who are notorious for not exactly getting back to people. And I don't know what you do. It happens a little bit for lobbyists, but not usually, because they never really know when they're going to need us or whether we're going to be representing some group that can give them money. So I don't know. I think it's a distinct minority of legislators. Most of them kind of ran for office, whether we agree with them or not on issues, because they kind of are people. They kind of like folks. They like to mingle you know, that you kind of have to do that to campaign. So they want to make friends. You may just have to write them off, run against them, support somebody else in the future. But that is not a typical thing. Usually, even if it's somebody who you don't agree with on some issues, assuming you haven't been posting on social media about them, which is also a tip I might give. If you're looking at it from the standpoint of impacting legislators, you have to be a little bit careful about social media and what you say, and that's just kind of common sense. So I don't know. You might contact me later, and we can have a confidential discussion of who that is, and maybe I can come up with some ideas. I have found that sometimes all it takes is a little bit of luck, and keep having somebody in your group who has some in with them can open a door for everyone else. Karen Franklin, who's the longtime director of NASW, has excellent relationships with a lot of legislators going back to when she was a student at UT Martin. And it now turns out that a senator who is very interested in all our issues calls us up because he remembers Karen and wants to get our take on issues. So that's a long way around of saying they're busy. Sometimes they don't get right back to you. Generally, they'll have their staff call if they can't. But I think that's unusual. So I hope that's not the case for everyone. If you are trying to get to a legislator, it's always a good plan to try to go through the staffer. And if you can't get an appointment, or if they say, oh, yeah, this unbelievably busy for the next 3 months, you may not be just able to see him for whatever reason. Meet with the staffer. See if you can, in fact, get an appointment, or go down to the Cordell Hall building and just walk around the hallways and go in there and say hello and be friendly to the staff person. That staff person is extremely important, and sometimes a meeting with him or her can be just as important, and a relationship with him or her is just as important as with the elected official. This next one is somewhat controversial to me, even though I put it in here. Respect the decision maker in the office. I don't mean agree with, I don't mean admire, but they can kind of tell us if they're disrespected. And there are many ways to look at the public policy process. What I've devoted this set of materials to is not the only way to do it. I mean, the rallies around Justin Jones and the Tennessee Three, all of those ways of advocating are very valid. I'm not the expert on how to do that. I'm an expert of sorts on how to do the other end, the micro end of getting the right vote out of your legislator on a specific issue. So I don't want to be seen as too Pollyannish here, but respect the decision maker to the extent that you can, because they can tell when they are being disrespected, and they don't like that and are not likely to do what you want. Just kind of basic. They don't have any time, so they don't read a lot of journal articles. What you're going to leave with them or say to them, it has to be short and sweet. It has to be clear information without a lot of jargon, and it has to be your visit and also your letter to them, or your email has to be short and sweet. These are a string of things you don't really want to do. You don't want to overstay and make them not want to make an appointment with you again. You probably don't want to threaten them. It generally is not conducive to getting them to do what you want. You may feel better about saying something that is strongly worded that you really know is not going to convince them, but it will make you feel better. So if you're doing that, just realize you may be burning a bridge for later, where there may be more of a chance to get to them on an issue. Obviously, none of us like to be attacked, and neither do legislators. So I know this sounds all very moderate and all this, and I'm mostly, this is mostly the kind of things that work in general. There's always a time for stronger advocacy using different methods than sitting down with the legislator. Also remember that there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. The people who are our worst enemies on some issues become our best friends on others if we still have a relationship with them. There are conservative Republican senators from West Tennessee who will not vote with social workers on many issues at all, but one of them, and I'm not going to go into a lot of names, was a strong vote against the rest of his caucus when it came down to a lot of racial issues, because he had heard from social workers on a great number of issues and in a very well presented way. And he is our friend on many, many issues, even though he doesn't seem like he would be. So there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies. You have to set certain priorities. You don't want to sit down with them and have, these are my 10 bills for the year. Please let me give you about 5 minutes on each one, because you're not going to get 50 minutes with the legislator. And also, of course, make sure you thank them. And advancing, yes. Any questions on that first set of thoughts?
Are you able to see the next screen? Yes. Okay, great. Just wanted to check.
All right. Now this is kind of fun. We're just going to go through it real quick. This is how a bill becomes law. And when you finish, you'll realize it's not particularly easy, which I think I might say is a good thing most of the time, particularly with our legislature. I don't want to give you the impression that I think they're doing a good job. They're making laws totally contrary to what my values are and most of the professions that are represented on this group of folks. But this is just some things to realize. This is how a bill becomes law. I won't go through very many. Which is one? Yeah. So these, I'm not going to read this to you. I'll send it to you later if you'd like. But this is how it begins. It has to go through all these committees. It has to go through various calendars. It has to go through in the very same way in both the House and Senate, down to the wording. And it can take months and years for it to go through. But it's meant to be complicated, and not easy to pass new bills. And that's good for us in some ways. We stopped a lot of bad bills just through the sheer influencing of one or two legislators to ask enough questions in a committee to keep them from getting to it. And then they organize more opposition and all of that. So I guess I'm saying that the details of passing a bill in this state are good for us, because it makes it hard to do. And most of the time, what they're more likely to pass, and I'm making assumptions here, are not necessarily bills we would like right now. It has to go through all these steps and then down to the governor. If he does not sign the bill, it becomes law anyway. He can veto a bill. And unlike other places, like at the federal level, a constitutional majority of both houses can override that veto. Governor Lee has not vetoed a bill in the several years he's been on. In the 8 years that Governor Haslam was on, he vetoed 7 bills, and they were all sustained. In other words, they were not overridden. He would not have been able to have that record had he done it to every other bill that he didn't like. He reserved it for very specific things. So basically, a governor's veto is not usually used. So it comes down to what the legislators are going to do. And And before we get to the pop test, which I guess I didn't tell you about in advance because it's a pop test to see how much you know. Are there questions? Let me stop for a moment to see if there are any questions in the chat that are relevant for where we are.
Nothing there right now, Stewart. You answered the one.
The one substantive one. Okay, good. Yeah. So I hope you like pop test. These are a lot more fun to do in person because you can call on people to give their best answer. But instead, you're just going to have to assume it would be very humorous and interesting if we were in person, because we really can't quite do that. But I will ask for participation to see if any of you know the right answers to any of these. So this will make you all better lobbyists, even if it doesn't seem like it just from looking at it. The official name for the Tennessee Legislature is what?
General
Yes.
Assembly.
I can chat if you want.
What'd you say, Linda?
General Assembly.
Very good. Although I like 7th grade a little bit, but it's really not something I would suggest to you to suggest to them. There are how many Tennessee legislators? Anyone? That's none of the above. There's 132, 99 House members, 435 is Congress, and 33 is Senate. So there's 132 legislators, and you can't get to know them all. You can get to know the ones who represent you or who are perhaps on a key committee that you have some knowledge of the subject matter on. And I think all of these are background things that maybe help you understand the process a little bit. I know it may sound Mickey Mouse to do this, but to me, I think it's helpful. So House members, not senators, but House members normally have how many paid staff members? Question, anyone? No one knows? Well, this is one of my favorite ones because no, they don't pay for their own, but they also don't have 3. You know, if you're used to dealing with a congressperson, they have scads of staff in their home district office and in DC. Our legislators have 1 staffer each, unless they're a committee chair or something like that. 1 staffer. And that staffer is not necessarily someone who is a political scientist or a researcher. They rely on lobbyists, paid and unpaid, citizens or not people who don't think of themselves as citizens, but as representing a particular client. They rely on other people. They don't have time or expertise to become experts on what they're voting on. So if you develop a good rapport with and confidence level with your legislator, you can actually make a difference in how they vote on many bills.
Let's go back to 3 because I don't think we did that.
Oh, that's right. So that was number 4. I skipped over 3, which is kind of important since we're talking about lobbying. All persons who lobby in our state must register if the bill they're lobbying for passes, then they have to register. If they're being paid or if they take legislators out to eat in public. So what's the right answer to that? That would be, in fact, B. The good news is that you don't have to register. The reason you don't want to have to register is that it costs money. You don't have to register to be a citizen lobbyist. If you are paid anything, you do have to. We actually have a pretty good state law governing lobbyist. And you must register if you're paid anything. And whether that's in public or private. And I think that I put that in there because some people might assume that they could be getting in trouble if they do a lot of contacting legislators and all. Is there something that they're doing wrong by not being official? No, I mean, there are people who are there every day, spend hours a day trying to get their bills through or stop bad bills. But because they're doing it as citizens And it's people who are interested in not getting paid, then they don't have to register at all. So that's, I think, important to know. Number 5, number of bills. I'll just speed this up a little bit to say there's about 1,600 bills almost every year, 1,500 or 1,600. That's a lot less than Congress, but it's maybe a lot more than you thought. That's how many bills are filed. And every year, about a third of those pass. So the odds are against the bill becoming law, which is sometimes helpful. But you can see with that number of bills being filed, they don't have the knowledge or time to review these bills. They can only look at those that are brought to their attention or that they're on the committee to be looking at. The top priority this year, and I can say that because it's always the same every year. I know somebody knows the answer to this. What's the answer? I don't know if we've ever talked about it.
Re-election.
Re-election, of course. That's the always the. We did talk about it, maybe. No, she's just very smart. The top priority every year is also, you might say, the budget, because it's the only bill that the Constitution requires to be passed. So once the budget actually does pass, that's when they go home, because they're sick of it by then. So the top priority, depending on how you look at it, is the budget or re-election. So they do want to please people, because they want to come back as a general rule.
3127.
The salaries, I think obviously you don't have any particular reason to know this, but the thing is, it's $28,000 per year, and that may sound oddly small, because they just devote so much time, whether you like them or not. They devote so much time. So it's sort of a citizen legislature. What that means often is that it's older retired people who have the time to do it and the money to finance their campaigns. It's not the greatest system in some ways, just because a lot of people cannot afford to end their career. A lot of lawyers used to be in the legislature. They aren't now, because $28,000 is not a lot of money, and they found that they could not keep up with their law practice, because it takes an increasing amount of time. So I threw that in there just to show you that that it's not something they get rich off of. Some of them literally do it as a labor of love. Others, they love the notoriety. They love the fact that people in their district know them and all of this. There's a lot of reasons people would run for office, but they are not volunteers. Neither are they full time. That's why it's important for people who care about the issues you care about to help them do their job. They do not have the time and energy to know everything that you wish they would. And there we go.
Click on the thing. Just click.
Okay, moving on. What time do we have? Okay, we're going to move quickly. A bill that a House subcommittee votes against is normally dead, but not always dead. It can still pass if the full committee votes for it. So in the House, a subcommittee doesn't really totally stop a bill, but most of the time they will not move it to the whole committee if they didn't get enough votes to pass it. So the point there is, you can stop a bad bill with a very few people, because it doesn't go past the committee. If it's not approved by the committee, it doesn't even go to the full committee if the subcommittee is against it. So most bills, 2/3 of the bills that are introduced every year, do not pass. So how many contacts does it take? Is it crazy for you to think you can make a difference? Well, no. I've seen one person, and not necessarily a rich lobbyist, but one person many times can stop a bill, or get a legislator to sponsor a bill and pass it. That helps if the person is well known and if it's from the legislator's district, of course, but it does happen. It can also happen if lots of people with not a lot of money and who don't give a lot of money to campaigns really work it and have well-presented ideas and get other people behind it. And, you know, the other one there is one person the legislator knows and respects, or who works for an employer that the legislator knows. Any number of ways that you can get the right result. Also, it's a very partisan place. So moving on to number 10, the last time since 2011, it's been pretty much a Republican legislature. Before 2011, the last time all the leadership, the governor, the House, and Speaker leadership were Republicans was in 1869. We've had a Democratic legislature for almost our entire history of the state until 2011, and since then it's been Republican dominated. In those early years, the Republican majority was made up of business Republicans. Those people are not there much anymore. It's more extreme right-wing Republicans now. The House of Representatives, for instance, after the last presidential election, circulated a letter that was signed by all but 6 Republican House members saying that this was a rigged election and nothing should be certified. It is an extremely conservative and reactionary majority that now governs our state in the legislature, and you just kind of need to know that. Right now, number 11, over 100 of our 132 legislators are Republicans, so it's not a close thing. The other thing that says is, if you're a Democrat and you only want to talk to Democrats, that's fine, but you can't stop a bill that way, and you can't pass a bill that way. So just, it's important to kind of realize that you're going to have to talk to people who may not always be on the same side as on every issue. Finally, the most important thing is, who is your state senator and your state representative? That's the people who really care what you think, because they can help you or hurt you. I mean, you can help them or hurt them in their future political time. Let's see, next. Okay, that's who I am. I hope you will contact me if you have questions. And I have other things here. We're no longer screen sharing because the rest of what I had to say was not necessarily part of a PowerPoint. Give me just 1 second. I don't think the other handout that I was going to speak from is particularly important, because otherwise we won't have any time for questions. I've gone through a whole lot of things. It may not be what you're anticipating. So if you have a question that I haven't addressed at all, please ask, whether it's about this process or specific issues that you'd like for somebody to be looking at and maybe getting back to you on.
Stewart, if you could address, since there's so many bills, how do we follow what's happening? What's the most efficient way to know what's being proposed, and et cetera? Any suggestions on that?
Yeah, there are lots of groups that follow the legislature. And I don't know all of your professional affiliations, but I'm relatively certain that most of you are either social workers or psychologists or counselors or therapists of some kind. I think all of your organizations have very good legislative representation at the state legislature. I mentioned the psychologist because your lobbyist is the lobbyist for other lobbyists and very well respected. And he's the one who kind of called a group together to see what we could do about some of the trans issues, and came up with something that kept it from being worse. So you should if you're part of an association, you should be getting reports from your state coordinating group, NASW, in terms of social workers. And yet there are a lot of other volunteer groups that provide great information on a range of issues that I suspect you may be interested in. The League of Women Voters of Tennessee does a whole lot. It's all free to whoever wants to join, and I mean, actually, you have to be an actual member of the league. You do have to pay dues, but the information that they send out to their membership and suggestions for advocacy is free. So those are a few thoughts there. There's also a way for you to follow bills that I didn't really have time to kind of develop a good explanation online for on this presentation for, but we have and have had for many years one of the most open governments in the country. Our state legislature has committed to that years ago, and it's never really wavered. You can see what's happening at any point in a committee or subcommittee or the floor. It's live, and it's also saved, and you can get to it later if you want to see just what they were talking about, what your own legislator said about it. All of that is something that you can follow. I don't have the time to kind of go through step by step how you do that, but they make it pretty easy. And every single committee and subcommittee is videoed and kept. So that's one way, but there really are not any successful Lone Ranger lobbyists. So it has to do with getting to be part of an organization, whether it's professional or issue-based or what. Just a couple of war stories. I once passed a funding bill for a major client by just kind of asking people who they knew in the legislature, and found out that one of the employees, a secretarial employee for one of our members, went to church with a particular legislator. And she was all for the bill we were talking about, and she talked him into it, and he actually sponsored the bill and passed it. So sometimes it's hard to overstate the importance of relationships, your own and your organization's, when it comes to successfully stopping bad bills and passing good bills. Which, if you think about it, you know that. I am happy to say that their staff at least reads things. They read things, they accumulate things for their legislators to say, you got 17 calls against this bill, and most of them are from our district. That is something that people don't always know. It does make a difference, particularly if it builds on itself. Your first time, and they may not care as much as the second time when they say, oh, this person's an activist, or this is somebody who really cares what I'm doing.
I saw a good question in the chat.
There's a question in the chat right here.
Yeah.
See.
Now that they are going into session, what would you recommend we do to impact the current session and bills?
Just so you can see it too. Okay.
Let me put that on hold, since I've now found the
Oh no, you answered all those.
let's see. Oh yeah, that is the one. Yeah, that you're just reading what she said. I'd write a letter. I wouldn't wait for it to necessarily be up for a meeting. They're not going to start their committee meetings until they'll have a few next week, but right now they're just dribbling in. The bills are just dribbling in, and the committee's agendas are not large. So you've got a couple of weeks before they start really having many bills at all on their up for action that they have to know something about and vote on. So you've got time. The issue is knowing enough about a bill that you're for it or against it, and care enough about it to write or call, or to be sure you're in the right organization, either volunteer or professional organization that can feed you information that you would want to know and would be able to use as you make contacts. That's pretty general. Is that What do you think?
Well, I think that you're 100% correct. And I think that definitely like making your presence known, whether it's by trying to schedule a meeting or even if something, like we did see, I know that's a little antithetical to what we talked about earlier in terms of moderation, but I have seen protesting be effective in terms of getting national attention on issues. And sometimes that can help force legislators' hands. And there's also an application called 5 Calls that allows you to contact your representatives. I just recently heard about it. I haven't tried it myself yet, but it basically helps with that process and helps you do that quickly rather than having to manually do all the calling and all the emails for each person. So that's an application to check out. It's called 5 Calls.
If you're interested in that, just email us and we'll get something out to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Would it be worthwhile just writing to our rep and our senator and saying, hi, here's who I am, just letting you know, I'm watching you, I'm interested if there's anything going on that I could help you understand that affects mental health? I mean, would it be?
I think that's great. I don't think I'd send it without that last part because you don't want to say, if you want my advice about anything, but if you can be specific enough to say, I know and care a lot about some mental health issues. If you'd ever be interested in talking with me or hearing from me, I think that's fine. They do not read word for word, but their staffers do. And they always read, the staff always reads if it's a constituent. They really want to know if what your address is, because there's a different level of response if you can't vote for the person or against them. So yeah, just a friendly letter. I represented the League of Women Voters for many years, and we had a coffee for a newly elected Republican senator, and he got to really enjoy that evening and became aware that this group knew what they were talking about and became a champion for all of our bills. A Republican senator who was our most reliable vote because of individual members of a nonprofit group like the League who made an early call, not berating him or anything else. But it is also true that there's a role for activism and hard-hitting advocacy. I'm just not the expert in how to do that.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. Thank you for asking that one.
Stewart,
Yeah.
Is this a new assembly and are the bills from the last session carried over, or do they need to get those bills reapproved?
It's not a new assembly. It's the second year of a 2-year assembly. And so anything can be brought back up that didn't pass. Like if it didn't get out of committee, didn't have enough votes to get out of committee, it's still in that committee and would have to start there. And so, yeah, that's, it's not new. They do carry over and they don't have to refile it. But generally, if a legislator is going to try to pass something, they'll file a new bill if it had trouble before and get a new number and just go with it. They don't want to have to explain, well, this is the bill I couldn't get out of your committee last year. So they'll often they'll often file a new bill. We have time for 2 or 3 questions.
If anyone wants to just unmute themselves and ask a question, feel free, or you can put it in the chat and I'll read it for Stewart, whichever you prefer.
While you're thinking about that, I get pretty pessimistic about things at the legislature. I've seen it degenerate from a standpoint of my own values rather dramatically. But there's never a time when it's not worth doing something. I mean, you look at last year and think of it as they did nothing about guns, they did this, they did that, they didn't do this. But every single year they have not passed something that was terrible, and they have passed some things that are good. And it comes because not just organized groups, but individuals as well as groups making their views known and taking the time to build a relationship of some sort with the elected official. So that's kind of what I wanted to close with, if there are not any other questions.
And I'll quickly drop your email, Stuart, in the chat, just in case people missed it earlier.
All right, we're putting it in the email, in the chat, if you'd like to write me on your own. Okay, I'd like to thank Rachel for helping me put this on and for gathering some of the resources. She'll be working on the Hill as soon as they get back. And I'm just going to give her everything to do, along with a couple other great interns that are working with us, both of whom are on this call. So thank you guys for being on here too.
Bethany Justice and Tristan Slough.
Right. They get all the hard work because I'm tired of it. I'm going to give them all the hard things. Okay. Thank you guys very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for taking